Do you believe that angels walk among us? Not with wings, not with halos, but with words that heal, with gestures that welcome, and with a presence that arrives at exactly the right time, when everything seems to be falling apart. This is not just a story about coincidences. It's about encounters that change destinies, about someone who appeared out of nowhere and disappeared without leaving a trace, but he left a miracle, something inexplicable, unforgettable, invisible, but real. Stay with me until the end. What you are about to watch now may awaken something within you, and maybe remind you of someone who showed up when you needed them most. Have you ever met an angel? Emily was only 26 years old, but she already carried the weight of a lifetime on her shoulders. From a very young age, she learned that nothing would come easy, that the world doesn't give gifts, and that if she wanted something, she would have to earn it with the sweat of her brow. She wasn't the type to play the victim. On the contrary, she smiled. Even with her knees scraped by life, she smiled. She was one of those rare people who choose to see the glass half full, even when the water barely covers the bottom. Her joy was her armor, and her mother, her strength. But no one warns you when life decides to change the course of things. Since she was a teenager, Emily had shared a small apartment with her mother, Donna Rosa, a sweet woman with fragile health, but a huge heart. Her mother's illness was never an obstacle, it was a commitment. Emily didn't see her as a burden, but as the reason she got up every day. She worked from an early age, left her dreams in her pocket, and faced double shifts without ever complaining. If there was pain, she hid it. If there was fear, she transformed it into strength, until suddenly, her days began to change, and not for the better. It all started with a decision that seemed promising, an investment that could be her chance to climb one more rung on the stability ladder. A new project at the company, an opportunity that she seized with all her energy, believing that finally something big would work out. But what was hope turned into ruin. A failure in the project, which wasn't even her fault, ended up splashing directly on her. With no right to defense, no room for explanations, the dismissal came like a bucket of cold water in the middle of winter. Her salary, her plans, her pride, everything went down the drain in a matter of minutes. Emily left the company in silence. He didn't have the strength to question. He just picked up his things, left his badge on the table, and crossed the street as if he were carrying the world on his shoulders. She still tried to smile, like she did on bad days, but the mask no longer held. And, as if the pain wasn't enough, he decided to hide what had happened from his mother. I didn't want to worry her. Maybe he thought he would get a new job soon. Maybe she wanted, for once, to solve everything, herself. But there was something in the air that announced that the storm was just beginning. That night, the silence inside the house was heavy. Emily ate a small dinner, exchanged a few words with her mother, and locked herself in her room. She tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. She thought about the bills, the medicine, the bills that would soon be due. She thought about everything she had lost and what she could still lose. And then, around 2 a.m, a loud sound echoed through the house, like dry thunder coming from the kitchen. She ran, frightened, and what she saw froze her blood. Her mother lying on the floor, motionless, with her eyes half open and her body cold. Emily was overcome by despair. She screamed, shook, called for her neighbor, and dialed the ambulance with trembling hands. Minutes that seemed like hours passed until the paramedics arrived. At the hospital, the tests were quick and cruel. Her mother's condition was serious, much more than she had imagined. The doctor explained carefully, but the truth hit her like a punch. Donna Rosa was fighting for her life, and the battle would require expensive tests, continuous medication, and daily monitoring. Emily listened to everything in silence, sitting on a plastic bench in the waiting room, with her hands crossed and her heart crushed. She was alone, completely alone. The sun rose, but it brought no relief. After spending the night in tears and confused thoughts, Emily left the hospital like a ghost. Her eyes were swollen, her mind was clouded, her steps were unsteady. She walked aimlessly through the streets, feeling the weight of everything: the unfair dismissal, the failed investment, the fear of losing the only person she truly loved. No one in the world knew how she felt. No words seemed capable of healing her. Until, tired of walking, she found a park bench under the shade of a tree and sat down. And there, she finally cried. She cried like a child. She sobbed. That bench, old and forgotten, was the only space where she could collapse. She no longer had the strength to support the world she had tried to keep standing for so long. Her face, wet with tears, was hidden between her hands. The world for Emily seemed to have ended there. But As life is full of unexpected twists and turns, something was about to happen in that place. Something Emily could never imagine. Something that would change her life forever. This is the story of thousands of people who struggle in silence, who don't have time to suffer because they have to move on. Emily is one of those strong souls, but even the strong fall. And sometimes, when all seems lost, that's when help comes. And it doesn't always come in the way we expect. If this story touched your heart, be sure to subscribe to the channel now. There's a lot of exciting stuff coming up, and this story will warm your soul and make you fully aware that miracles really do exist. The sky, that late afternoon, seemed to follow Emily's heart, cloudy, sultry, ready to collapse. She was curled up on the wooden bench in the square, her shoulders shaking between muffled sobs. Her hands covered her face, but not even they could contain the pain that flowed in silent tears. There was something in her crying that wasn't just sadness, it was exhaustion. Tired of fighting, of pretending everything was okay, of being strong for everyone, all the time. For the first time in a long time, she allowed her pain to overflow, in public. And it was precisely at that moment that everything began to change. Without her noticing, someone approached. His steps were light, almost imperceptible. He didn't say anything right away, he just sat down next to her. There was something gentle in that gesture. No sound, no question, just presence. After a few seconds, he held out a clean handkerchief toward her, as if he knew exactly what to do, without intruding, without pressuring her. Emily, still sobbing, looked up strangely. It wasn't common for someone to approach her like that, without judgment, without rushing. And what caught her attention the most was the man's gaze. Calm, firm, as if he had seen a lot of pain, and learned to overcome it. "Hey," he said, his voice calm, low, but deeply welcoming. "Don't be afraid. Everything will work out." Sometimes it's at rock bottom that we find the direction of the sky. Emily was speechless. Those simple sentences, spoken with disconcerting conviction, passed through his chest like a warm breeze on a freezing day. Who was that man? And why did he seem so sure that everything would work out, even without knowing anything about her? The doubt was there, but it didn't matter. For the first time in days, Emily felt something different inside her. A spark, small, almost faded, but alive. He introduced himself as Daniel, a common name, but one that rang with a strange familiarity. There was something in the way he spoke that made it seem like he knew exactly what she was feeling, even without asking. Emily hesitated for a few seconds, but then she accepted the tissue, wiping her eyes slowly. She didn't answer right away, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if the words were being spoken without any sound. The strangest thing was that he didn't ask what had happened. He didn't want details or explanations. It was as if he already knew, and yet he didn't need to know. Minutes passed, and Daniel remained there, beside her. He looked ahead at the fountain in the square, as if he could see something beyond. Emily, still disconcerted, tried to hide her swollen face and her shame at having been seen in that state. But Daniel didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with respect, with a presence that was as light as it was firm. "You're not alone," he said, as if stating an ancient truth. And even though it seems like everything is falling apart, sometimes it's in this collapse that life prepares a new beginning. Once again, his words reached places Emily didn't even know existed. She shook her head, trying to smile, but it was clear how much she was still broken inside. The truth is that Daniel didn't seem like a stranger. It was as if he already knew her, as if there was something familiar in the way he said those things. Emily still couldn't explain what she felt, but there was a strange peace in that encounter, and peace was all she needed at that moment. Daniel didn't linger for long. He stayed there for a few more minutes, told her that she needed to rest, that tomorrow would be a new day, and that somehow everything would change. Before saying goodbye, he just lightly touched her shoulder and said, "Have faith." Then he stood up as lightly as he had arrived and walked away without looking back. Emily stood there, still, with the handkerchief in her hand and her head spinning. Who was that man? Why did his words echo so much inside her? Was he just a kind stranger? Or was there something more? The strangest thing of all was that she wasn't afraid of him. Not for a moment. It was as if he was already part of her story, even though he had appeared out of nowhere. That night, despite the pain, was not like the others. For the first time, Emily fell asleep with a feeling that something, however small, was about to change. Moments like these cannot be explained logically. There are encounters that seem written by an invisible hand, as if life put us exactly where we need to be, to hear exactly what we need to hear. Daniel appeared out of nowhere. but he brought everything Emily needed most: presence, calm, and faith. Have you ever experienced something like this? Or do you know someone who appeared in your life and changed everything, without asking for anything in return? Comment here, your experience. What you tell us could be what someone needs to hear today. Let's talk. This story is just beginning, and it's still going to blow your mind. Stick around. I can assure you, what comes next is even more impressive. The sun seemed indifferent to the pain Emily carried. She walked the streets like a body without a destination, with no clear direction, just following, trying to escape the avalanche of emotions that suffocated her inside. The day had been another series of closed doors, cold interviews, hurried glances, standard phrases that hurt like silent slaps. It was as if no one had time to see the person behind the candidate. And as if that weren't enough, life seemed to have saved the cruelest blow for the end of the afternoon. It was while she was walking home, after hearing yet another, "We're sorry, but you don't fit the profile," that her cell phone vibrated in her bag. She grabbed it automatically, not expecting anything important. But when she opened the notification, the world went silent. An anonymous message, no text, just a photo. And there it was, Jason, her boyfriend, in the arms of another woman, kissing, with desire, with surrender. As if the love she had once sworn to Emily was a figment of her imagination. But the worst part wasn't just the kiss. It was who was with him, Sophie, the same one who used to come to her house, who laughed with her on Sunday afternoons, who said, "I love you," with eyes that she now realized were fake. Emily stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, stunned, her heart racing, her legs shaking. The betrayal, the neglect, the abandonment, all at once, in the middle of the street, like a punch in the stomach. With her face wet with tears and her breathing unevenly, she could only walk to the only place that now made any sense, the square, that bench where, the day before, she had found some solace. A wooden bench in the middle of a world that was falling apart. And as if fate had compassion, there was Daniel, sitting, calm, as if he knew she would come, as if he had been waiting. Emily approached silently, her shoulders hunched, her eyes red. When she sat down next to him, she couldn't hold it back. She let out a sob so deep it seemed to come from her soul. Daniel didn't ask anything. He just held out his arms, and she went, without thinking. She let herself be enveloped. She gave in to the crying, the exhaustion, the pain that no longer fit inside her. He held her tightly with a gentleness that said everything words couldn't. It was a hug that didn't demand explanations, that didn't offer empty advice. It was presence. It was shelter. Emily cried silently, then spoke. Between one sob and another, he let it all out. The sequence of no's, the despair with the sick mother, the fear of not being able to pay for the exam, and now, the betrayal, the humiliation, the breach of trust. "I'm sorry, Daniel, for breaking down like this once again," she murmured, her eyes lowered, as if she were invading a space that didn't belong to her. But Daniel held her face gently, raised her gaze, and answered with serene firmness, "Emily, you don't need to apologize for feeling or for falling. That's what I'm here for, to help you get back up. You're not alone. And more than that, I believe in you. You're much stronger than you think. You have a courage inside you that you don't even know about yet. And it's this courage that will make you win." His words weren't just a comfort. They were like an injection of life, as if something inside her, even in ruins, remembered to breathe. It was incredible how that man, with his simple words, could reach places she didn't even know existed. With him, Emily didn't feel weak. She felt human, seen, supported. They stood there for a long time, side by side. The silence between them was not empty. It was healing. It was respect for the pain. Before saying goodbye, Daniel held her hands and looked deeply into her eyes. "You won't go through this alone. I'll be here, every day, until you remember who you really are." Emily didn't answer, but for the first time that day, her eyes, even swollen, reflected a small, light, fragile, but real. When everything falls apart, the right presence can be the balance between sinking and holding on. Daniel didn't save Emily with empty promises, but with something much rarer, permanence. And that permanence is a silent but powerful form of love, or something greater. Comment now. Have you ever had someone show up exactly when you needed them most, even without you asking? Share your story, your support for Emily, or your cheering for Daniel. Let's feel it together. And don't leave. What happens next not only changes the course of this story, but it can change the way you see certain presences in your life. Emily had woken up lighter that morning. He had slept deeply for the first time in weeks, as if his body itself knew that, after so much chaos, a new cycle was taking shape. She was making coffee when she decided to step outside for a few minutes to breathe in the fresh air. When she opened the door, she could hardly believe what she saw. Daniel, standing in front of her, with the same serene smile and that firm gaze that always seemed to know more than he was saying. And before she could ask anything, he said, "I made some calls yesterday. I have some contacts in the investment sector, and I got you an interview. It's today. One of the biggest companies in the industry. Go. Trust me. This door is yours." Emily could barely react. She was still trying to digest his unexpected presence there when she was swallowed up by the weight of the news. A what? Job? At that company? It was too big, almost improbable. But Daniel didn't give her room to doubt. He just held out a piece of paper with the address and smiled, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. It was as if somehow he was rewriting her fate. She put on her best clothes, the same ones she wore to her last interview, and went. On the way, she repeated the name of the company as if it were a spell, trying to convince herself that it was real. When she arrived, she was even more surprised. She didn't wait at the reception desk, and she didn't fill out any forms. She was taken straight to the HR department. Someone there had already heard of her. And not only that, they said she had been highly recommended by someone with a lot of influence. With her resume in hand and her eyes shining, she heard what she never expected. "Emily, you're already hired." She left the company floating. Her heart was beating fast, as if celebrating for her. She walked aimlessly, smiling alone through the city streets. The first person who came to her mind was Daniel. She needed to tell him. She needed to thank him. But where could she find him? The answer came almost like magic. The square. It was always there. And yes, there he was, sitting, calm, as if he had already known she would come. She said nothing. She just ran up to him and hugged him. A tight hug, of gratitude, of rebirth. "Thank you. Thank you for everything." He just returned the hug firmly and then said, smiling, "Today we will celebrate. It is a night of victory." And in that moment, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Lightness. It was as if his wounds were finally cauterized. As if the pain, which for so long occupied so much space, was giving way to joy. Life had plunged her into deep, suffocating waters, but now she emerged different, not broken, but polished. That night, Daniel arranged to meet her at a fancy restaurant in a neighborhood she barely knew. She arrived at the agreed time, looked around, but Daniel wasn't there. The waiter approached. "Are you Miss Carter? We have a reservation made in your name. The owner of the restaurant is expecting you." Confused but intrigued, she was led to a special table. There he was, not Daniel, but the owner of the place. A polite man with charming eyes and a gentle smile. They sat down and talked about music, books, the beauty of new beginnings. There was something magical about their meeting. She laughed like she hadn't laughed in a long time. She felt alive, warm inside. At the end of the night, she said goodbye with a sparkle in her eyes. He walked home feeling like he was in a movie. A plot that, until a few days ago, seemed doomed to pain, now took on new tones. He walked into the house, took off his shoes, and threw himself on the bed with a long sigh. His heart was warmed. I thought about that interesting man I had just met. He was thinking about how everything had changed since the moment Daniel had appeared. That stranger who had become an anchor, a direction, an impulse. But the story was not yet complete. Her mother was still in the hospital. And even though she now had work, hope, and even new encounters, Emily knew the fight was far from over. She still had to be strong. She still had to win one more battle. It's amazing how life, when it seems to have crushed us, finds a subtle way to lift us up. Daniel was like a lighthouse in the middle of the storm, guiding Emily not with empty promises, but with presence, action, and faith. And the most curious thing is that all of this seems to have a greater purpose. Now share here in the comments if you have ever experienced something like this, and leave a heart if you are rooting for Emily on this journey of rebirth. And stay tuned, because what Emily doesn't know yet is that Daniel holds a mystery as big as his heart, and he's about to reveal it. Emily was different. There was a lightness in her gestures, a sparkle in her eyes that, not long ago, had seemed dulled by pain. With each new day, something inside her grew stronger, as if her pieces were little by little fitting together again, but this time in a new way, firmer, more whole. Her new job involved challenges that she faced with courage. For the first time in a long time, she felt capable. But the fight wasn't over yet. Her mother's health remained a concern. The medicines were expensive, very expensive. Her salary hadn't come in yet, and the expenses were piling up. Emily didn't know what to do anymore. Then, on a gray morning, while she was having a quick coffee before work, her phone vibrated. It was a bank notification. A Pix had been deposited into her account. The amount? Exactly. Almost surgical. It was exactly what was needed to cover all of her mother's medical expenses. Emily froze. She stared at the screen as if in disbelief. There was no identification, no explanation, no sender. Just that amount, coming from who knows where or who. But, strangely enough, at that moment, she had no fear. Just a quiet sense that somehow she was being cared for. That same day in the afternoon, Emily received flowers. A beautiful arrangement, with soft colors, with a handwritten card, to the most beautiful and most special woman I have ever met in my life. Signed by Anthony, the owner of the restaurant with whom she had spent that magical evening. Emily smiled, a sincere, serene smile. It was strange. For the first time, she was being treated with kindness, with respect, with enchantment. Anthony spoke to her without rushing, without hidden intentions. The way he looked at her wasn't with desire, it was with admiration, and that disconcerted her in a good way. That afternoon, alone in her room, Emily allowed herself to reflect on everything, on who she was and who she was becoming, for the first time, without fear. She saw herself as a strong woman, yes, but one who had spent too much time trying to prove it to the world. The rush she had created for herself was her armor. It didn't allow for pauses. It didn't allow for feeling. Now he realized that relationship with Jason was never love. It was an escape. She clung to the idea of making it with someone who never really saw her. And what about friendships? I no longer knew what was genuine or disguised interest. When everything fell apart, no one was left. And perhaps the end, as painful as it was actually a deliverance. Today, all she could think about was gratitude. Gratitude for having broken, for having fallen, because now she was standing, no longer driven by desperation or obligation, but by choice, by deserving. Emily was experiencing something she had never experienced before, peace. And that day, she had an even bigger reason to smile, one of the biggest. Her mother had been discharged. Finally, Emily went to pick her up at the hospital with her heart full of joy. She entered that room with tears in her eyes, but this time, tears of happiness. She hugged her mother as if she were hugging life. "Let's go home, Mom. Everything will be okay now." And indeed, it seemed that way. Emily's life was starting to fall into place, not because everything had been resolved overnight, but because now she knew she was strong enough to carry on. And the most beautiful thing is that in the midst of the chaos, she found people who helped her remember that. Emily is experiencing what many of us take a while to understand. Sometimes, the end is not a punishment, it's a new beginning. When she stopped chasing after what hurt her, what healed her began to find her. And now tell me, have you ever gone through something that seemed like the end, but later turned out to be the best thing that could have happened? Share here in the comments. The days seemed to be stitched together by a thread of hope. Emily was blossoming. It was as if life was finally giving her back everything it had once taken away. She worked with a sparkle in her eyes, returned home with gratitude in her heart, and felt proud of her daily care for her mother. That heavy shadow that had been following her for months was finally beginning to dissipate. And in the midst of all this, Daniel continued to be the sun among the clouds. He always knew what to say, or when not to say anything. Sometimes he would just sit beside her with that calm smile, as if to say, "You don't have to explain anything, I understand." He brought lightness where there was pain, silence where there had been screams, peace where before there had only been fear. And Emily, without even realizing it, was no longer walking alone, and she didn't want to. But all of that lasted until the day Daniel disappeared. Suddenly there was silence. The messages were not being answered. The square was empty. The places they used to visit were now just memories. Emily looked everywhere for where he could be. She called. She sent audio messages. She went to the company where he said he worked, and nothing. There, no one knew the name Daniel Rivers. Not in HR, not at the front desk, not anywhere. Emily, with a heavy heart, began searching the internet, social media, public records, databases, and it was as if he had never existed, but she knew he existed. She knew. He held her hand. He wiped her tears. He held her when she thought no one else cared. How could she forget the sound of his voice telling her she was capable of unimaginable things, that he believed in her when she herself couldn't? That couldn't be an invention. It couldn't be an illusion. Emily felt, deep down, that when she cried out, the sky responded, that when the ground gave way, someone up there sent reinforcements. She needed that hug, that presence, that look that said, "You still have a future." Daniel came as a whispered answer, and perhaps that was exactly what it was. A few days later, while organizing her things, she found the book he had given her. She hadn't read it yet. The title was simple, but it caught her attention, Those Who Walk Invisibly. She opened it slowly, and, page after page, she felt something different taking hold of her. The book was about angels, not with wings, not with shining halos, but angels in disguise, sent in the form of ordinary people. People who sit next to you in the square, who appear when no one else does, who hold your hand in the middle of the storm and remind you who you are, even when you forget. Her heart raced. The tears came before the end. And then, on the last page, almost imperceptibly, there was a dedication in pen, from your forever friend, Daniel. And next to the name, a small drawing of wings. There, Emily knew, with all my strength, with all my soul. Daniel was an angel. He fulfilled his purpose, he helped rebuild it, and he came home. Today, she still visits that square. She sits on the same bench. She speaks softly to the sky, and he swears that one star, one in particular, shines differently. Could it be him? Listening to everything like he always did? She doesn't need answers anymore, because today, what she has is gratitude. Gratitude for having crossed paths with an angel named Daniel. And you, have you ever had someone in your life who appeared as God's answer? Someone who arrived when everything seemed lost and made you believe again? Share with us. Maybe. Your Daniel has also left wings out there. Miracles don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they have a name, a smile, and appear out of nowhere, like a whisper from the sky. The most beautiful thing is that, even after they leave, they continue to live within us, reminding us that we were loved and that we were never alone. This story reminds us that even on the darkest days, the sky never leaves us without an answer. Sometimes God sends angels in the form of ordinary people who arrive with the right words, silent hugs, and gestures that transform. Emily thought she had lost everything, but she gained the most precious thing: hope, renewed faith, and the certainty that she was never alone. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because in next video comes another report of divine intervention that will chill your soul and strengthen your faith. You can't miss. I'll wait for you. And stay with me, because what comes next will still warm your heart.